So, have you ever wondered why some people can totally bomb a presentation and just bounce right back with renewed energy, while others are absolutely crushed by a single tiny mistake? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the hidden psychological forces driving our deep need to succeed. We're going to look at some pioneering psychology research and then pair it with a fascinating 2026 study out of Hungary, just to see what's really happening inside our heads when we constantly chase perfection. Look, we have to honestly ask ourselves if this modern pressure we all feel to be flawless and to constantly look smart is actually a double-edged sword. I mean, we live in a world that heavily praises high achievers, right? But what happens when that relentless drive comes from a place of deep-seated anxiety rather than, genuine passion? Is the very way we think about our own intelligence secretly pushing us straight toward mental exhaustion?
To really understand this, let's rewind back to middle school, an incredibly anxious time for pretty much anyone, let's be honest. But for psychologist Carol Dweck, as a sixth grader in Brooklyn, it was actually a defining moment. Her teacher literally seated students in order of their IQ scores. The quote-unquote smart kids even got special privileges, like carrying the flag or washing the blackboard. And because of this incredibly intense comparative environment, Dweck became absolutely terrified of losing her top status. She actually avoided participating in a spelling bee and a French competition, just so she wouldn't risk messing up and looking foolish.
Now, that childhood experience ended up inspiring Dweck's foundational framework, which she first introduced in a 1988 paper. She defines a mindset as our underlying belief about where our abilities actually come from. Essentially, it's our core assumptions about whether our personal attributes are malleable, meaning they can change and grow, or if they're just carved in stone from the minute we're born. And that childhood fear of hers brilliantly illustrates the core divide in her theory, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe your talents are just locked in at birth. You actively dodge challenges because, in your mind, failing means you simply aren't smart enough and you desperately want to protect that image. On the flip side, someone with a growth mindset believes success is built on hard work and persistence. For them, failure isn't this permanent stain on who they are. It's honestly just data. It's a stepping stone for learning and development. Dweck herself really anchored this concept during a 2012 interview, giving us this profound quote. She noted that when we believe talent is fixed, our entire motivation shifts. It's no longer about actually learning. It becomes entirely about avoiding looking incompetent. As she put it, their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. And when you stop and think about it, living your entire life just trying not to look dumb, that is an incredibly stressful way to operate.
So, how does this classroom anxiety translate into the adult corporate world? Let's take a look at a modern application of this. We're going to dive into a really fascinating 2026 academic study published in Problems and Perspectives in Management by a team of Hungarian researchers. They basically took these exact same psychological pressures that Dweck observed in kids and explored how they manifest as intense, grinding workplace perfectionism today.
What's really interesting here is the scope of the research. The team surveyed 478 working adults across a whole bunch of different roles and companies, looking at both Hungarian and foreign-owned firms. Notice the demographics on this. A significant majority were women, sitting at 67%, with an average age of 29. The researchers basically wanted to see exactly how this modern, relentless drive for perfection is impacting mental health and burnout in today's workforce.
And what they found was fascinating. The researchers discovered two distinct faces of perfectionism that perfectly mirrored Dweck's mindsets. First up, you have a maladaptive, self-doubt-driven perfectionism. This stems from deep insecurity, a paralyzing fear of failure, and this constant, exhausting need for approval, which sounds a lot like the fixed mindset, right? Then you have an adaptive, purpose-driven perfectionism. This is characterized by a real desire for mastery and setting high standards, but crucially without the paralyzing self-criticism. And that aligns beautifully with a growth mindset. But before we look at the fallout of all this, we kind of have to ask a bigger question. Why are these extreme expectations becoming so incredibly common in our daily lives? Well, the study found that perfectionism isn't just some isolated individual trait anymore. It's a socially reinforced pattern. In fact, younger generations are reporting much higher levels of perfectionistic concerns than older employees. So what exactly is fueling this? According to the study, it's basically a perfect storm. It's a mix of rising societal expectations and organizational cultures that just demand constant high performance. Add to that the blurring of work-life boundaries driven by social media, where we feel this nonstop pressure to perform both publicly and privately.
And then there's specific gender norms to consider. The research highlights that women often face what's called a competence-warmth trade-off, where they can actually be penalized for displaying pride at work. So you take all these external pressures, and they quickly internalize into this exhausting, impossible demand for flawlessness. Now, the crucial point here is seeing how this self-doubt-driven perfectionism actually plays out at work, literally leading employees straight into counterproductive behaviors. It starts with internalized conditional worth, which is that heavy, crushing belief that you are only valuable if you are flawless. This naturally leads to constant exhausting self-monitoring and rumination. Because of a deep fear of judgment, these individuals really struggle to delegate. They dread receiving feedback, and they often end up micromanaging or procrastinating. Ultimately, this psychological strain completely depletes their mental resources, taking them straight into profound emotional exhaustion and burnout. However, it's super important to note a fascinating nuance the researchers uncovered. Even healthy, purpose-driven perfectionism has its limits. The study cites findings showing that in work environments characterized by incredibly high stress, or worse, a lack of social support, even adaptive striving can produce really harmful consequences. It just goes to show that the environment we are in plays a massive role in whether our drive for excellence acts as a constructive motivator or if it turns completely toxic. Now, while these theories about mindset and perfectionism sound incredibly intuitive and make a lot of sense, they have actually faced some really rigorous scientific scrutiny. To put that into perspective, the real-world limits of these psychological theories were tested in a massive 2019 UK educational trial by the Education Endowment Foundation. This was a huge deal. It involved 101 schools and over 5,000 pupils. And the result? They found that students who received a growth mindset intervention showed absolutely no additional progress in literacy or numeracy when compared to the control group. None. And this brings us to the scientific critics of Carol Dweck's work. Psychologists like Timothy Bates have really struggled to replicate her findings. On top of that, Nick Brown applied a statistical tool called the Grimm test to some of Dweck's early data and actually found mathematical inconsistencies. We're talking about numbers that statistically shouldn't be possible, which led to the discovery of recording errors that Dweck did openly acknowledge. Other critics raise a much broader philosophical concern. By hyper-focusing on an individual's mindset, we run the very real risk of blaming people for their own failures while letting completely broken educational and corporate systems off the hook. Yet, despite these academic debates and the whole replication crisis, Dweck's theories remain undeniably and highly influential. Just to show you how influential, in 2017, she was named one of the inaugural laureates of the Yi-Dan Prize for Education Research, which is an award that came with approximately $3.9 million. Her work continues to resonate on a global scale, largely because it addresses such profound, fundamental questions about human resilience, how we face challenges, and how we ultimately view our own potential.
So, what should you really take away from this explainer? It's this. Whether we were talking about a middle school classroom or a high-stakes modern office, tying your self-worth to flawless performance is just a guaranteed recipe for mental exhaustion. The ultimate goal here is to shift your perspective. We need to stop constantly trying to prove our worth and start focusing on steadily improving our skills.
So, the next time you find yourself endlessly obsessing over a tiny mistake at work, losing sleep over a minor flaw, or maybe even avoiding a new challenge just because you're afraid you might not look smart right out of the gate, I want you to step back. Take a hard look at your own internal motivations and honestly ask yourself this final question. Are you truly striving for excellence, or are you just running from self-doubt?